are missing. We are missing from so many rooms, classrooms, boardrooms, everything in between. But we are here. We are programmers and coders, animators and analysts, engineers and entrepreneurs, designers, builders, creators, the bringers of change. We are here. We are here leading. We are here innovating. We are here working for our vision of better companies, communities, and countries. We are here. We have always been here. Our stories, our voices, our ideas have always mattered, more than mattered. And we won't stop asking more of the spaces that need to make space for more like us. All of us, all different types of us.
Good morning, afternoon, and or evening, everyone. My name is John Moore, and I serve as the co-chair of the DC hub of BOLDforce. BOLDforce is one of 12 employee resource groups here at Salesforce, what we call equality groups. And the BOLD in BOLDforce is an acronym that stands for the Black Organization for Leadership and Development at Salesforce. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's broadcast, Civic Engagement 2.0 and Empowerment Panel. So quick housekeeping items. This broadcast is being recorded and will be available on demand from boldforcedc.splashthat.com. There will also be time for Q&A, so please do feel free to use the chat or use the Q&A to drop questions in throughout. So today's conversation finds us turning to the world of civic activism. And I think when we see terms like civic engagement being employed, it signifies to us that we're about to embark upon a conversation about politics, but I want to, from the onset, make it clear this is not a political conversation. Not because civic activism is an apolitical set of activities, but because civic life is really far more expensive and inclusive. So this is very much a yes and conversation. So let's start with a quick working definition. Civic engagement means working to make a difference in the civic life of our communities and developing the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. It means promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. So that leads us here today, right? And we want to achieve three things. We brought together this amazing collection of thought leaders to address the following and help us to do these. Get smart. Firstly, we want to quantify civic engagement, or maybe even the lack thereof, specifically in Black communities, and then illustrate the potential impact of increased civic participation within communities of color. We want to get involved. How do we as individuals go about becoming advocates for change in our communities? So together, let's identify some of the opportunities that lie before us and some of the organizations that are on the front lines that we can support that are already doing this work. And then lastly, we want to get resources. Let's get tooled up. Let's walk away from this empowered with some actual action steps. You know, business is the greatest platform of change. That's what we say here at Salesforce. So what are enterprises like Salesforce, similar companies across the tech industries, doing to encourage meaningful civic engagement? But before we go any further, I just want to remind everybody, I have to give this legal statement. Salesforce is a publicly traded company. So should you decide to make any purchasing decisions today, please do base those decisions solely based upon products and services that are currently available. And now, to introduce our moderator and our panelists. Our moderator today is Mr. Michael Hornsby. He's the immediate past chair of BOLDforce DC and our current strategic advisor. Mike joined Salesforce after 8 years of federal service in the White House Office of Administration on the White House Information Technology team and in the Office of Presidential Correspondence. Next up, we've got my sister Roxy Ndebumadu, who is a history maker in her own right. Roxy made history in 2019 when she became the youngest woman elected to serve as Bowie City Councilman and the first African-American woman to represent District 4 in the state of Maryland. She is also, like myself, a fellow Howard alum, HU, and the true definition of a trailblazer. So welcome to the stage, Roxy. Next up is my brother, Deion Jones. He's another White House alum, having served in the office of then president, vice president, and now our current president, Joe Biden at the White House. He also served on President Obama's Tech Hire Initiative at Opportunity at Work. He currently resides in LA, but during his tenure here in DC, he became the youngest elected official in DC history as an ANC commissioner and currently wears the multifaceted hat of musician, entrepreneur. He's a creative who's lent his gifts to collaborative projects with actor Jesse Williams, internationally recognized conceptual artist Glenn Kino, and most recently as a producer for Withdrawn Arms. This is a documentary film that's now airing on streaming platforms, so check it out everywhere. It's highlighting the life and work of legendary Olympic gold medalist and social activist Tommie Smith. And finally, we've got Katie Mears, who is a senior policy analyst on the government affairs team with a specialized focus on the state and local sector here at Salesforce, and brings us a wealth of insight on corporate initiatives that are driving policy and empowering corporate citizens to deeper their engagement in civic life. So without further ado, I'll turn this over to Mike. Mike, the floor is yours.
If you are not ready to go now, after that introduction, I mean, like we should be all, getting ready to go out and save the world. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. So we're going to get started right away. Roxy, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk a little bit about how you describe the way that you engage the community and what got you into politics.
What got me into politics? Oh my gosh, I love that question, mainly because I got into politics because, to be honest with you, I was frustrated. I was pissed. I was angry. I had a number of experiences that made me frustrated with the system and the way that I was being represented and the way that I was being included. And that was really making me upset. And a lot of people tell you to go seek therapy, but instead I decided, why don't I just run for office? There were a lot of people around me who told me that it wasn't going to be possible, or you're crazy, you're out of your mind, oh, you shouldn't do that, or maybe wait until you get a little bit older. For me, what was burning inside of me was I made a promise to the little girl inside of me that I would always be the advocate that I wish I always had. For me, it was important to be in those rooms where people who were like me, whether that was young women, whether that was women, whether that was African Americans, whether that was people of color, were represented in rooms where we traditionally are not. And that's why I ended up running. That's why I got involved in politics. I knew that my perspective was going to be different. I knew that I was going to come in and demand efficiency and accountability for a system that has been broken for so long, and for conversations that often skew in one particular perspective, in one direction, that don't accommodate the masses, but more so accommodate the minority. And when I say the minority, I'm not talking about Black people. I'm talking about a specific amount of people in a space where one decision caters to the liking of them. And so that's essentially why I ended up running.
Thank you for that answer. And I appreciate the way that you use minority, the way that you clarify the use of minority. I hear that often. It always rings a bell in my head. I've got one more question for you just about your journey to politics. So after making that leap, and I do appreciate the fact that no therapy, I'm just going to run for office. After making that leap, how have you been received by the people that you work with? Because as we'll get into, you also have a life in tech. How have you been received in your new world?
So I remember when the news first broke that I won my election, and I don't think people at work knew I was running, because it was kind of a situation where I was honestly, quite frankly, nervous. And I didn't want to tell anybody because I didn't want these preconceived notions of, is she going to perform? She didn't do her job. What's going to happen now? Like, is she going to leave? I didn't want to deal with that. So I didn't really tell anybody that I was running. But the people who lived in the city of Bowie, because the city of Bowie is fairly large here in the state of Maryland, Prince George's County, we are the third largest city in the state of Maryland with 70,000 people. So I didn't really tell anybody. When I won, the day after, when I returned to work, because technically as a city council woman, let me tell you the myth here, it's paid as part-time, but we're really full-time. So don't let them tell you that we're part-time, it's really full-time. The day after when I won, I returned to office, one of the VPs at my company, who's no longer there, said, well, her work must be about to decline because there's no way that she can do both. And me and my colleagues were like, hold on, like, are you trying to say that she can only be good at one thing? That if she takes up space in this political capacity, which most people I don't think understand, enables me to be a better tech professional. Like the two are intertwined. It's not one or the other. The two enable each other, because the things that I learned from technology and the way that products are designed and the way inclusion happens with our customers where I work is what enables me to also be a better leader on the council side, because it helps me understand people. It helps me understand design, makeup, the way people receive problems, the way people interact with different initiatives or whatever it is. It helps me understand the way people communicate. So the simple fact that he said that, I already knew that there was gonna be a lot of, I guess you would say, hate surrounding what I was doing. I'll tell you one last piece. After that, my then manager at the time quickly approached me and said, oh, we need to review the moonlighting policy, and started asking me all these questions of how many hours a week do you work? Do you have an intention to run for higher office? And just did all this like digging. And so I felt like this narrative was being painted around me. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Of course, later on, we ended up talking to legal, and legal ended up clarifying, because me being elected does not violate our moonlighting policy because it doesn't intersect with my job. It's two completely separate. I then started to realize that people were scared. Like people were shaken up at the simple fact that I'm 27 years old, who's doing something that a lot of people do not do at my age, at my time, taking up space in rooms that I'm not going to say I don't belong in, because I think I belong there, but by other people's definitions, I may not belong there. Taking up space in these rooms that a lot of me's and a lot of you's aren't representative. And I realized that a lot of people were scared of that, and they just didn't know how to handle that. And one thing I'll leave you with that I've realized since I've been elected, it's almost going on 2 years now, people can only meet you as deeply as they have met themselves. So if somebody has not met themselves that deeply in the level of impact that they seek to make for their community on behalf of a higher and greater cause, they will not be able to meet you where you are either.
Yeah, I was reacting to that. I was on mute, so the whole room didn't have to hear me react to that. But I love that. I love that. And we'll get into this a little bit later. But if anybody around you has ever heard you talk about customer success, then they would have known you could have done both jobs very easily. So we'll leave that for the next question. Dion, I want to go to you now, and I want you to tell me a little bit about your journey. So you've been involved in politics, entertainment. You're considered an activist, but I'd really like you to describe your work, how you see you move through the world, how you see yourself moving through the world.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Salesforce, for having me here. So yeah, I feel like I've lived a lot of lives. However, they have sort of always intersected. I think what's important, particularly around my work now, having those experiences, obviously from DC, White House, et cetera, to being at the executive level with partnerships with Jesse Williams and working with Oprah, all those type things have led me to sort of where I am now. It's funny that, you know, and it's sort of a running joke that I have with myself. You know, you go out to a protest, you get shot in the face. Now everybody wants to call you an activist. And I always say, you know, I show up every day in my work as an activist. Me getting shot in the face by a police officer with a rubber bullet didn't make me an activist at that moment. In my everyday work and my everyday decisions, I show up that way. Activism and politics is a part of that. Even how I show up in the world, the ability as a Black gay man to make decisions for myself is politics and activism in itself. And I think that all of us, particularly those who represent minority groups, the fact that we choose agency over our bodies, over our decisions, over how we're treated, over our peace, over boundaries that we set in our life, those are all political decisions that in some capacity, you know, you want a great life for yourself, but in turn, you want to live this life that you are making sure that you are creating an equal playing field and sort of operating in justice for others as well. And so, you know, activist is sort of a buzzword, just like BIPOC and all those other things. But I consider my everyday, just how I show up in the world, as activism and as a part of my politics, just being who I am. So the fact that a Black man can go out and, you know, get killed by the police for no reason, that is, you know, a concern to me and a part of my work. The fact that, gay folks and trans folks are still discriminated against, Black trans women are still being murdered at alarming rates. That's still a part of my everyday thinking and a part of how I feel like I need to show up in the world for folks. And so I push that into my work today, that when I am having conversations, particularly in one part of my work, where I'm having conversations of folks who are either writing stuff in a creative studio, thinking of a storytelling project, whether I am working with Glenn and putting together a museum show, etc. And we're talking about voter suppression and voting rights, whether I am working on my music with John Batiste. I'm actually working on the album right now. I'm bringing all of those experiences with me, and they show up in how I decide to make decisions and how I decide to inform people and educate people who don't look like me and who don't share my experience.
I really appreciate the way that you've sort of brought all these worlds together, because, excuse me, I'm a little bit hoarse. You think about the power centers in the United States, you think about entertainment and finance, right? You think about government, and you think about, the way that you brought these worlds together, tech, because you also played in the tech world as well. Are you specifically intentional about how you bring these worlds together, or are you just locked in to where these conversations lend themselves to political activism? Sorry to use that word again.
Yeah, no. So intention is actually my favorite word. And so I do lead with intention. I don't choose things just because I do see an outcome, and I start even when I start means I say the intention of this call, the intention of this Zoom is. So you know what the outcome of why you're getting involved and why you're there. And the fact that you show up somewhere and not knowing why you're there, it should never be the case. So there should always be an intention there, and particularly, on the tech piece. I have collaborated with Jesse Williams on some apps, and particularly our Ebroji app, which is a gift keyboard that is full of Black faces and full of Black gifts. Shout out to Nene Leakes, Whitney Houston, and all these other folks who give us great gifts across our cultural diaspora. But however, the idea of us doing that was, of course, it's entertaining for Black folks who, love culture, love reality TV, love fashion, love music, love, Black Twitter, all those type things, to be able to use and share this creativity. However, our intention behind that is that we're making this app not really for Black folks. However, what we're doing is, when a white person in Oklahoma uses the Ebroji app and Ebroji gift of a Black face to communicate an emotion with her white boyfriend or mama or etc., in Kansas, they are communicating with faces and folks that they normally don't see all the time. And in addition, the emotions that can be expressed by Black folks. So for example, Cicely Tyson has this story that when she did Sounder, that a white man came up to her and said, you know what? I found myself, I think, being prejudiced because the boy in the movie Sounder in the 70s, she said that he called the father, Paul Winfield, he called him daddy. And he had never heard Black children call their Black fathers daddy. And Cicely Tyson said it stopped her in her tracks. And she said, oh my God, this man doesn't see me as a human being. And so the fact that we can create something that people can use in a digital space, these gifts of Black faces, of Black folks crying, laughing, excitement, loving, et cetera, and white folks can use that to communicate with each other, we can show them that we have those same emotions that they experience with their families, with their children, that their loved ones every day. And so that is like one example of how it was intention that led us to making a decision to creating something like that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it brings to mind that there's a deprogramming for lots of communities. All of us need to see each other differently. And so I love the focus on sort of the culture, but also the intention of broadening that conversation. Katie, I want to hop to you really quick and ask you, how do you see this sort of, the phrase that we use is business is the greatest platform for change, but how do you internalize that? How do you sort of see your work through the lens of that statement?
Yeah, I know John mentioned that at the top too, and it's something that we like to say a lot around here. And it can mean a lot of different things, but for the government affairs team, part of that, not just our policy work and our advocacy that we do, on the ground. I'm state and local, so I'm on the ground in city halls and state legislatures in the Midwest, particularly. But we also want to encourage our employees and provide them the tools to get engaged in their communities. I think it was you, Mike, or John that said, it's not just about voting. It's not just about politics. It's not just about the latest tweet, right? Like, it's really about getting involved in your community and having your voice heard. So for us as the employer, we just want to provide, those tools. And I definitely think it's part of a larger trend that's going on with companies and corporations. I think particularly tech, but also a lot of other companies that I've interacted with in this work who are leaning into these discussions. Companies that have never felt comfortable talking about voting or voting, registering to vote, things like that, has really kind of been taboo for the sort of standard corporate world. And so companies are leaning into this. I've had a lot of companies reach out for guidance, on how to do this in a nonpartisan way, just to get, resources out to folks. And the other thing is, I think that we saw particularly this year for the national election in the US was that giving these tools, employees just, take them and run with them and do amazing things. So we're not really taking credit for that. We're just giving the framework, we're giving election day off, we're giving the tools, right, and the space for folks to do what they think is best for their communities.
So how do you see companies sort of growing this, right? So if you think about the national election, everybody sort of focuses on the general, but the local is equally important. Like, the local affects our day to day. So like, how do you see big companies focusing more consistently on enabling folks to get out there and be more civically involved?
Yeah, and we kind of think of this, three major pillars for us, the way we do things and how we've sort of been evangelizing to other companies to do this. One is just, as I mentioned, tools, right? We have a partner, TurboVote, that we use to help folks register to vote, update registration, and get reminders via email and text, which is super important, right? You're going to not forget about the presidential election every 4 years. You're going to know that's coming, right? But your local elections, your city council, like, you might miss that if you're not plugged in, right? So we want to make sure people are getting those reminders, and we encourage other companies to partner with those folks as well. And then it's just education. So we will bring in local races to our big hubs in various cities across the US. So we bring the candidates to you and let our employees interact with them, ask them questions. It's not a debate. I see Roxy's looking big. Not a debate. We bring them in separately. We ask them the same set of questions, right? We keep it fair and balanced, but we definitely want that interaction, and it makes it real for people, right? Like, these are real people. They have perspectives on issues that you care about, and you need to pay attention and understand what their perspectives are. And it does matter. We also communicate early and often. We really know that it's important to participate in primary elections. So we send reminders to key hubs, right, ahead of those. Again, folks generally know when general elections are happening, but those primary elections can be super important and might be your local election for your city or, your mayor or something like that. So we early often with the communication. And then lastly, we have, especially in the last year, given a lot of money to organizations doing work on the ground. We gave to Democracy Works, who was helping with voter registration, especially during COVID, which is just so, overwhelming for folks. Things were changing constantly. How am I going to vote this year? What's going to be available in my state? It was, for 3 months, there was just updates, on a weekly basis. So they are on top of that. And then we also gave to the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, who have traditionally been doing this work on the ground to make sure that everyone is able to participate.
Well, I don't know if anybody knew this on the panel, but there's a project here. We just haven't figured out what that project's going to be, but we're all going to be doing something together. I mean, obviously. Uh, Roxy, I wanted to go back to you, and I know that sort of your background in your 9 to 5 or the first 9 to 5. I know you use data a lot to make decisions. You're very informed by the way that you sort of enable success with your customers through the use of data and analytics. How do you measure success in politics? How do you measure success as an elected official? Similarly, I guess, but like tell us like with some detail around that.
So success in politics looks like no emails. That's success in these days. That's the easiest way to measure success, is that no one is emailing, nothing is on fire, no one is angry with you, and people are in support of whatever is going on. But typically when it's quiet, that's typically how most people would measure success. But honestly, when I think about success in my role, I like to look at a lot of things that are going on with our demographic breakdown and understanding where people are financially, what's our current unemployment rate, what's our Chamber of Commerce doing to that, like really mapping those numbers together. What's the number of people that are without broadband? What is that percentage looking like? How many businesses are actually providing steps and initiatives to eliminate that digital divide? Like, what does that look like? So there are all these data points around these different, I don't want to call them initiatives, but pillars that affect the quality of people's lives. So that's, whether you're employed or not, whether you have an adequate traffic pattern that, like, for example, when you're on the way home from work, and if there are potholes on a particular street that's affecting the way that you get home, you're going to be angry. That's affecting your quality of life. If a particular road is closed for whatever reason, that's affecting your quality of life. If there's more development coming into an area that's creating more saturation because there's a lack of infrastructure, that's another thing that affects quality of life. So really what we like to do is take data points and really understand what's going on, what are those common trends, and is there infrastructure to support what's going on?
So when you show up with data in that office, how do your colleagues respond to the fact that you're literally cutting through, weeks and weeks and weeks of discussions with an answer that says, no, here's the problem right here, let's just address this? How do they respond to that?
Interesting. My colleagues, when I show up with, this is the reality of coming from corporate America and going to elected office. I don't think people are vibing with that all the time, but my colleagues, they get really, I guess you would say, I don't want to say the word is triggered, because triggered can be used in a negative, with a negative connotation, but they get really aware, put it like that, get really aware, because for them, traditionally in local government, I'm not referring to the federal government, but in local government, there isn't always a ton of data to back everything in terms of the way that decisions are made. So most of the time when elected officials are making decisions on the local level, from my perspective and what I've seen, a lot of them are going based off of what they feel, or they spoke to one loud majority and they're going off of what that loud majority is, because that loud majority either has the time to go amplify their voice, or can go rile up the rest of the community members to get them to back a particular issue. So I think what happens is when you see somebody like me, who is a very data-driven person that use data to be able to make informed decisions a little better, I think my colleagues are at a little bit of a loss because they don't understand, because that traditionally hasn't been their path. It's almost like, why do we need to do so much? Like, why do you want to ask so many questions? Like, why are you pressing so hard on this? And that's the question I always get. Like, why are you pressing so hard? And I'm like, but I'm not pressing at all. I'm just doing my due diligence before I make the decision to be able to make a better informed decision, so we don't end up in a situation where we have to go back and try to reverse something that we should have fully vetted out before. So I think for them, it's a little bit unusual. It's a little alarming. They're not really used to it, because you're thinking, when you think about traditional local government officials, and this is just the way that it's looked in my community in the city of Bowie, a lot of people that are elected in our area, they've typically tended to be over the age of 50. Like, that typically has tended to be our elected officials. They're either retired, and this is like, kind of like a part-time in their way to give back and provide value in that way, or it's typically people that are in their 50s but still maintain a full-time job, typically in the government sector working at like Veteran Affairs or, IRS or something like that. And really focusing more on the program management or the project management perspective of their job. So the two usually don't necessarily always correlate in the way that they make their decisions. So for me, I think they're a little aware and probably sometimes often annoyed because I'm that one that tends to make the hearings go a little longer, asking all the questions. But I think the community's happy for it. I think they're happy about it because I try my hardest to every month put out a newsletter giving all of that data to my constituents, but synthesizing it in a way that they can digest it. Because I think what happens is a lot of elected officials, they'll put out information and data, but people cannot digest that. You need to break that down in layman's terms so everybody can understand and be able to meet you at an even playing field. Because it's not just because you can understand and just because you have a finance director putting it together. We have to remember that's not everybody's background. They're not all coming from the same perspective. So when you break things down and you put it in a digestible format and give them the basics and help them understand and put the data next to it, like the trends, the metrics, I mean, all of it, they will thank you for it. Like, I know my community's been happy about that.
Well, the interesting thing is, first of all, I appreciate that answer, but the interesting thing is that, coming from the tech world, that's all we do is look at numbers, look at data, look at outcomes. And having been in the public sector, one of the things is, from the federal side, is you have a lot of data, but you can't make sense of it because you've got too much data and you can't synthesize it and do anything with it. Katie, how do we form, I guess, more resilient, stronger public-private relationships? Like, how is Salesforce doing that kind of work, and how do we make each other better, right? Like, I think there's one thing, I'll just say this and then let you answer. I know I'm talking over, but there's this notion that the public sector can't do stuff. And when I was in the public sector, what I realized was that the problems were just so much bigger that you had to think about them differently. And they weren't focused on profits, they were focused on fixing problems and trying to make people's lives better. So how do we form closer partnerships between our worlds?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, definitely, to what Roxy was just speaking about, just being involved and being aware of what's going on in your community, and, demanding really that your elected officials give you the data and the information that you need and represent your interests. I think that's, what we try to educate our employees about and give them opportunities, like I said, to interact with public officials. So we can be that connector, and let people know that, yeah, it's okay to, interact and have this conversation with people that represent you. In fact, it's critical to our democracy to have that process. You don't just vote and walk away. Like, you really got to stay involved. So I think that's super important. I mean, Salesforce, we have great relationships with government officials at all at different levels, and we have conversations. And we have conversations with people with all different kinds of perspectives. We always follow our values in what we do, but it's important to keep those lines of communication open on all kinds of issues, because a lot of these folks do not understand what Salesforce is, to your point, like what data is, how to use it to do whatever work we're all trying to do, community work or, government work. Like, we have a role to play in educating our elected officials as well, right? So it's really a two-way street. And I think that making folks just more comfortable with that is going to go a long way into holding everyone accountable, right? And so I think that's an important part of what we do. And then, of course, as you know, I mean, we do a ton of community work and philanthropy. And so it all plays together. And as a government affairs team, we work closely with our philanthropy partners, our volunteer groups, right? Our ERGs, it all comes together. And we saw this again with the civic engagement with one of our BOLDforce members in Atlanta, rallying the tech community to turn out and work at the polls, right? Salesforce gave the day off. We said you can log, volunteer time off, but she did the work. Aubrey Broadwater did all the work to do that. And I think that's really what our role is as government affairs, is to help shepherd those opportunities and let folks run with it.
So what other examples are you optimistic about, or sort of things that you're optimistic about this year specific to these relationships? Because I think one of the things that happens in what you described is a bit of a translation, right? It's what can tech do to help enable that success? And then what do the people who are receiving that service actually need? And sometimes there's conversations that are not necessarily happening in sync, right? So what else are we going to be doing this year to build these bonds?
Yeah, I mean, we, especially in our, headquarter city of San Francisco, we work closely with city officials who are customers of Salesforce to make sure their implementation is going well. And we're actually going to start a pilot program to do kind of like a civic core, if you think of it that way, like tech workers going in to help make sure implementations are going well or give advice or do pro bono work. I mean, Salesforce has always done a lot of pro bono work, so that's not new, but to maybe focus that to the civic world. And again, these are things that haven't really been done before. Like I was saying about, companies talking about registering to vote with their employees. These are new spaces that I think have traditionally kind of been a little bit out of bounds. But we're going to lean into that and see that as sort of a pilot program this year.
Can I just add one thing, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Just to Katie's credit, we are just meeting for the first time. And one thing I can say, and Michael's probably going to roll his eyes a little bit at the statement. I was on Clubhouse last week. And Mark Benioff was on there on a stage talking with Mayor Breed about a lot of the stuff that Salesforce is doing out in San Francisco. And for somebody like me, I mean, there were a ton of local officials, locally elected officials out there in the audience. They also had the mayor of Austin, they had the mayor of Miami, and they were talking about all of the different initiatives and what they're doing and what Salesforce's role is in that. And for me in particular, I know I work in big tech as well, so I won't talk about what my employer is doing, but one thing that stands out to me always is how diligent Salesforce is in that process and being at the forefront in a lot of those things that are going on and a lot of those initiatives from a government affairs perspective. So it was really nice as somebody who was a locally elected official that was attending that talk to see Mark Benioff and his commitment and the way he spoke on it really passionately with Mayor Breed on the conversation with Felicia Horowitz. It was a really nice dialogue to see where those passion points were and where the investments were going and really making sure that the employees were involved and that they were supporting the community.
No, I think that's super important, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think one of the things that we have to do is and we're fortunate, we've got to keep up with, our leadership sometimes, right? And it's usually the other way around. It's usually, well, let's say there's a mix, right? There's always people are dragging the leadership. Sometimes we're dragging, and then leadership is dragging us, right? They're, and sort of getting us engaged, not a negative drag. But so I think that we are fortunate to have a leader that's really out there setting a high bar for us, because if we're not doing stuff and we look at the top and see him doing stuff, you've got to kind of check yourself a little bit. So no, I appreciate you mentioning that. Dion, can you tell us a little bit about, we're talking about this sort of, getting engaged locally. How do you see your activity translating into policy, right? So like it's one thing to be talking about issues, right? It's one thing to be really active in promoting issues. But how do we turn it into policy? How do we actually write laws that make people's lives better? And how does your work inform that process?
Yeah, and my apologies. In the world of Zoom, my computer ended up updating on its own, and I'm just like, Jesus.
I was going to ignore the whole thing, and you came back at the perfect time, so it didn't even matter.
Help me, Lord. So there are a couple of things, and Roxy, who is a local elected official, as I've been before in my life, knows this really well. We learn in politics 101, all politics is local. And the funniest thing happened to me when I was running for office and serving as an elected official in DC. I was serving on the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, and it's a local board that deals with sort of the most granular problems in your neighborhood. And because I lived on campus and sort of my residence was on campus, my residents around the campus sort of didn't, you know, weren't in my tax bracket, weren't in my, you know, didn't look like me, a lot of them, you know, $3.5 million homes type things like this. And one of the funniest stories I have from that is that I remember Alan Greenspan and Andrea Mitchell were my constituents, and they were they were worried about the speeding that happens down the street that's adjacent to the university that they live on. And they lobbied me and literally were like staunch, you know, sort of in my face around getting them speed bumps. Ended up getting the speed bumps, everything worked out well. But it was like those like granular things that we don't think about made me think about how does this affect communities that don't have the luxury of, you know, arguing about sort of, you know, granular things like speed bumps or things like that, because they are trying to get their kids, you know, formula. They are living in an insecure food area. They, you know, see the police come through their neighborhoods, arresting more folks, killing more folks. Then they see actual services being brought into their communities, or those communities that people just don't care if they have speed bumps and kids are getting hit with getting hit by cars and things of that nature, right? And so it was one of those moments in my life. It was like sort of an aha moment for me that showed me in order to change the everyday aspect of our lives, how do we build the political power, particularly around folks of color and Black folks and communities, like I said, didn't have the luxury of the community that I represented. How do we build political power so they can begin to make decisions for themselves? And so as if I'm protesting, you know, too many police in the neighborhood and they're arresting too many people, they're profiling folks, they're killing folks, etc. How do I think about who runs the shit? Who runs it? Who's in charge? You know, as like, you know, Delary said, like, who's in charge of the girls? I'm in charge of the girls. Or like, you know, who has the decision power? And so, you know, for me, it's like, when you think of just a situation like that, that's very close to Black folks, it's like, who's endorsing the police unions? Who are they endorsing? Where's their money going? How's the sheriff, you know, chosen? Is it chosen by the mayor? Is it an elected sheriff, etc.? You know, how is the police force? How do they do trainings around diversity and systemic bias, et cetera, But then in addition, what's another thing that people actually don't think about is how much are they actually paying out in settlements each year? So all of these things are just educational issues that we would want to know about, but how do you build political power around that? So you're making sure that you're putting folks in those positions and in those places and the patrolling of your neighborhood that actually keeps your neighborhood safer and not in a space where, again, you're experiencing all of those ills that a lot of communities across the country are experiencing.
Dion, what keeps you going? And not from a sort of trite perspective, because I know that you're compelled to this mission, but what keeps you going? Because the work you do is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. How do you keep your energy?
Yeah, you know, as I said before, like I wake up every day as a political agent, and just of how I show up in the world. And, you know, if Black men and Black folks in general are still, you know, suffering in ways that they shouldn't have to, I have something to do. If Black trans women are still being discriminated against at disproportionate rates, dying at disproportionate rates with no attention to these murders, there's still work to do. When, you know, Black gay men, you know, are still discriminated against in places, there's still work to do. And there's a story actually that is really interesting that sort of was an aha moment for me. So I live downtown, and 20 years ago, nobody would ever live downtown. It's now like the new hip area to live in LA. But downtown is also home to Skid Row. And so you do see homeless people, and you do see folks who are facing housing insecurity, et cetera, and you interact with them. And I remember I was coming out of this restaurant and super hungry that day. And I'm like, yo, I know what I'm getting. You know, when you have your mouth ready for something to taste it and you already ready for it. So I get it. And the same man that I would see all the time walking into this, at the corner of this restaurant, always asking somebody to give something. People would give him stuff, etc. And every time I saw him, he would be eating. And so when I came out one day, he said, yo, sir, can I have your food? And I'm like, damn. And so, you know, I've always been compelled to, like, you know, if I have $1, if I do something, like you have my leftovers or something, like or I'll buy you some food. I've always been compelled to, like, be helpful because, you know, I'm a human being, nothing human can be alien to me. And so so I'm hungry, I have this taste in my mouth, I'm like, Jesus, I really wanted this. And so I begrudgingly give it to this man. And I say, yo, you eat better than me. Because every time I see him, he's eating. And I'm saying this, like, sort of in a way, like, I really don't want to give it to him. And I just want to say something to him, like, how this is disappointing me that I'm going to have to give this up. And he said back to me, what makes you think I shouldn't? And I was like, whoa. And I, you know, wanted to say something back, like, whatever. And it was one of those things, I thought about it all night. I thought about it the next day. What makes you think I shouldn't? And when I show up in the world of who I am, as who I am, when, you know, I'm product of a single parent, Black mother home, I have a sister who's a Black woman, I have a niece who's a Black woman, who have to grow up into this world where everybody is telling them, because of who they are, what they can't have or why they shouldn't deserve what a person who doesn't look like them have. I think about it when we talk, particularly when we talk about immigration and why folks shouldn't deserve basic humanity and basic education, et cetera, et cetera. And I always go back to that question that man asked me: what makes us think that people shouldn't be able to live and operate and create and be in this world and fulfill the highest expressions of themselves without barriers? And until there is a world that is created like that through political organizing, through building political power, through operating in justice, and the definition of justice for me is operating in love. Until that is the case, we all still have work to do.
Beautiful. Everybody deserves dignity. Beautiful. Roxy, same for you. Maybe an anecdote. What is there a moment or one that you'd like to share that just reminds you of why you stay engaged in the work?
There are so many. I make myself so accessible because I know that when I look at my congressmen and I look at my senators, they're not accessible. And for somebody who is a constituent myself, who lives in an area and also has other elected leaders that represent me, I know how much of a hassle it is to get in contact with their offices or to try to reach out to voice my opinion on whatever is going on. So I go out of my way at alarming rates to make myself so accessible to the people in my community. So when you go across like all of my socials, whether that's Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, those are my direct phone numbers. Like that is actually my cell phone number. Like that's actually my email address. And I make myself available to anybody. And the reason why I share that is because there are so many residents who call me all the time, who text me directly and say, you know, Roxy, I have a situation where my tenant is trying to force me out. The house is molding. My child is here. What do I do? Like, I don't even know what to do. I've tried to email this person. I've tried to contact this person. I've tried to do this person, but I can't find the adequate information of how do I handle this? I don't have any money. It's moments like that. It's people like that who trust you enough to reach out to you, who find a way to get to you, that have the belief in their heart that you're going to find a way to help them, that keeps me going every single day. It's moments when I witness the frustration in the staff members that work for us and work alongside of us that keeps me going every single day, because there's no one person that has the answer. Like, this is a collective journey that we're all on, and we're all in this together. Like, each person on this call that's on this panel has a stake in the game. And whether we know it or not, we're working towards a collective goal together. Like, it's not going to just take one person. So I think for me, that moment is every single day when people reach out to me, when people text me and they tell me about what's going on. Because for me, I'm a very deep empath. Like, I have the ability to really hear about somebody's experience and feel it as if it were my experience, but also not take that pain with me, but still feel it in the moment to be able to act on it. I get riled by situations where the underdog is not heard, the underrepresented is not represented. There is no justice for people who deserve justice. I get riled up by those things. Like, those things physically bother me. And because they bother me, and because I see them, like, literally every Sunday, I just drive around my district and I just watch what's going on. Like, I'm not necessarily looking for anything. I just want to consistently and always immerse myself in the environment so that I can continue to feel what other people around me are feeling, because I never want to become so far removed from everybody else's reality that I don't understand their pain, I don't understand their struggles or what it is that they're feeling. So I think for me, that moment is every single day. That moment is listening to my interns and their ideas. And the greatest thing that being elected has given me the opportunity to do is give other young Black children and other children who are not Black the opportunity to work in our community and be alongside us, proposing those solutions that their generation is going to want to see. Like, that is one of the greatest gifts I've ever experienced in my life. And so I think there isn't one moment. It's a collective experience, and it's a feeling that I get every single day from being out in my community, by supporting the local business owners and the people that are here to continue to work towards this collective goal, which we're all after. And if we do get a moment, I really like to share how people can conceptualize getting involved, because I think there's a lot of myths around how you actually get involved as somebody who is not elected.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be a Salesforce meeting if we don't have next steps. I mean, we have action items. Yeah,
like, I love that point that Roxy was making around collective, right? And this will be a great segue into what you actually want to talk about, Roxy, because at the end of the day, you know, again, like, I went out, got shot in the face, and people want to call, like, DJ D on the activist. But there were things that I was doing way before I got shot in the face that I'm still doing after I got shot in the face, you know, that, you know, was active work in creating this world that we want to see, that's more just, that's more equal, to where everybody's treated with dignity. And so, yes, you have the folks who are out there protesting, and that is pushing demand. That is creating aggravation against the folks in power and showing the power of numbers. But in addition to that, you need somebody who's able to finance that movement. You need somebody who's able to bail those folks out. You need somebody who's able to provide meeting space, provide, you know, food and water and drinks, and pay for that stuff. And that's a role that people can play as well. In addition to that, there's the education piece, right? Like, you need folks like, well, why are those folks out there protesting? Why are those folks out there? I don't get it. Like, if he wasn't doing such and such, if he wasn't, you know, outside selling cigarettes, he wouldn't have got, you know, stopped by the police, et cetera, et cetera. And so particularly folks who don't look like me, don't look like Roxy, you, Michael, like you need those folks at their dinner tables explaining the why. That's a form of activism, and teaching folks to say, damn, I never thought about it that way before. And when those folks then go into work, when those folks go in to have other conversations with folks who don't look like the folks who are at the burnt of the stick at times, like they're able to articulate why there are folks saying Black Lives Matter, why there are folks out there saying the name of George Floyd. And because it's such a pertinent issue around folks getting killed by the police, we tend to have these conversations really talk about feature around police brutality. But there's everything from voter suppression. There's everything that, that blocks us from actually having our voices heard. There's everything from food insecurity. And again, the daily needs of folks that just need to survive, like particularly what we're seeing right now in COVID-19, access to healthcare, access to vaccines, access to quality testing, insurance to pay for things that even before COVID, there was a discrepancies in Black communities when it comes to diabetes, heart issues, etc. And so there are multiple ways that people can plug in into sort of this collective effort that leads us to that end goal and end intention of dignity, a dignified life for all.
Thank you, sir. And for the reason that I didn't do too much at the top of this call, because I wanted everybody to hear your words. I wanted everybody to hear from Roxy and from Katie. I wanted you all to really have the opportunity to share your thoughts and your wisdom. So as we wrap the call here, Katie, maybe you could talk a little bit about where people can find out about how Salesforce is offering opportunities, maybe even internally for some folks on the call, but externally as well. Like, what are we doing? Where can people find us?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things I failed to mention earlier that we accomplished this year was publishing a module on Trailhead, our learning platform, gamified, fun, free learning platform on civic engagement. So to Dion's point, it's the basics. What are the branches of government? How do they work? If you have a pothole, you're not calling the governor. Who do I call? How does this work? And then outlining what I just talked about on the call today, how we stood up a program at Salesforce and how companies can do that. And employees can push, really push their companies. Who in your company do you need to talk to if you want to see a program like that at your own company, right? You got to call legal, you got to call HR. Here's all the folks that you need to get on at the table to figure out how your company can do this. So that's something we're super proud of. We had 5,000 Trailblazers take that module this year. Would love folks to spread that around. I think that's super important. It has links to some of the things I mentioned, like TurboVote, Civic Alliance. If you want to encourage your company to join the Civic Alliance, it's just a group of companies trying to increase voter participation. And so that's another way that your company can get resources on how to do this, because it can be overwhelming for folks who have never talked about this or done this work before. So there's lots of resources in that Trailhead. So I would point folks there, and I was working with John to maybe hopefully send everyone some links after.
There will be homework, you are correct. Roxy, where can people find out about you and what you're doing and stay engaged with the conversations you're having?
So there are a couple of ways to find me, and I'll share that. And then there is one point I want to say about how to get involved. You can find me across all major social media platforms, including TikTok, for those who are a little bit more visual oriented. So I'm at all major platforms at Roxy and Debu Madu. I'm really active. Most of my platforms are ran by me. Of course, they have help, but they're ran by me. So if you message me and are interested in getting involved and participating, I will personally respond to every message. So I'm definitely very, very accessible in terms of conversations and things that I'm doing. I do a lot of work with Brookings Institute and leveraging their research and a lot of the stuff that they do with their fellows to really understand how municipalities can continue to make that change and what our place is with state government. So a lot of work there. There's the 3 points that I want to make on how you can actually get involved today, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily know where to start. The first thing is, I want to encourage everybody to run for office. I'm always going to say that as somebody who's ran for office, run for office. Like, you should. If you have that knack for people and you're passionate and no matter if you're scared, no matter if you don't know how to do it, like I don't even want to focus on all of that. But if you are passionate and you feel for people and you want to make a change, and the things that Dion talked about, they matter to you, run for office. That's number one. And you can run for office at any level, whether that's state, local, county, federal, whatever floats your boat. There are a number of ways that you can run for office. So run for office. That's the first one. The second one is, a lot of people want to be able to contribute, but they don't necessarily know how if they don't want to run for office. So get on a board. Every municipality, county, state has different boards and commissions that you, as a resident, constituent, can get on. We have different commissions in my city, and we appoint people to those commissions for like a 1 year or 6 month term all the time. The state of Maryland has boards. I sit on the State Board of Waterworks. So we have a number of different boards that if you are interested in making sure that your voice is heard and that you are represented in some of those rooms, then please apply to join a lot of those boards so that you can make sure that you're there. Because what ends up happening is the boards that you sit on, those are the people that advise those elected officials on those issues. So like for Governor Hogan here in the state of Maryland, the State Board of Waterworks, all of us who sit on that board, it's about 6 of us, we advise Governor Hogan on everything that happens with waterworks, as well as our environmental department for the state of Maryland. So really, really, really get on those boards. All you have to do is Google your county, your city, or your state, and then put boards appointments. And then those numbers or those links will pop up for you to be able to apply. The last way I wanted to talk about was nonprofits. There are a lot of nonprofits in the area that you can particularly volunteer with and get involved in. Reach out to a lot of those civic engagement nonprofits and just work with them, whether that's donate to them, whether that's, handing out food with them. Like in the city of Bowie, we have Employ Prince George's. That's a nonprofit in our area that's really working on eliminating this gap in the increasing unemployment numbers that we're seeing. Volunteer your time, tutor somebody, help somebody break into a different industry or space. If you don't have time to do that, if you're not able to do that, the other way is pay attention to what's going on the city and the county agendas. Make sure that you're paying attention, because oftentimes what ends up happening, like for example, I had a city council hearing yesterday. There could have been a vote to increase taxes on that agenda, and most of y'all wouldn't even know. And then you see this increase of tax, and you're like, why the hell are my taxes increased? Well, that's because you weren't paying attention to the city agenda. We do our best to try to communicate that out to the masses, but sometimes we can't reach everybody. So pay attention to those agendas. And once you do see what's on those agendas, if something particularly catches your interest, I want you to do me a favor and send an email to that elected official and tell them how you feel. Because what happens is at every hearing, we end up reading out and reporting on what it is that your comments are. We definitely read them out loud at our city council hearing to make sure that we understand how people feel about those agenda items before we proceed and discuss them. I want to leave you with this. The biggest nightmare for any elected official is for the community to decide one day they want to rally against a particular initiative and stand behind that. That is the biggest fear for any elected officials, because 9 out of 10, what's going to happen? They're going to spend that entire day, that entire week, trying to mitigate that situation and figure out how to resolve your concern. So I really just want to leave you with that, because it will remind you how powerful your voice is and how powerful your participation actually is.
Thank you. Love that. Dion, bring us home. Where can people find you? Where can people stay engaged in your conversations?
So I'm on Instagram at Dion T Jones, Deon T Jones, where I do a lot of stuff there. And you can, as John said, you can all stream the documentary Withdrawn Arms that I'm a producer on, and it's executive produced by Jesse Williams and John Legend. Tribeca Film Festival selected documentary on Stars. It's called Withdrawn, DRAWN Arms. So that's out right now. Upcoming in April, I'll be a part of an exhibition at the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. So that is exhibition with myself and Glenn Kino that's focused on voting rights and really comparing the 2 Bloody Sundays from Ireland and Selma. So that's going to be really cool. So look out for that. But there are 2 things that I just wanted to hit home on. One, I think things that companies can do, particularly in this setting, that allow folks to sort of meet the intention of this call. one, I think it's important that every company should be in a listening stage to their affinity groups and their Black employees. After in active listening, you must also do the work. And so you can't just say, you have to do. And you have to show and create measurements to that do that are also sort of overseen and, for lack of a better term, examined by Black folks and your affinity groups. And the third thing, create resources within the reach and sensibility of your employees. So, yes, I ran for office. Yes, Roxy ran for office. Yeah, people can run for office. Yeah, people can have boards. But I got 3 kids at home in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm like, trying to cook and do this work on all these Zooms. And so that may not be in my sort of wheelhouse, but creating spaces for them to be able to learn. And really the biggest thing I think for all of us is, and particularly Black folks, is around building political power. That is really how we change and create outcomes that we want to see for ourselves. And building that political power, I think, are in a few ways. One is education. As Roxy said, just educate yourself and educate others at the dinner table, over the phone, in friend groups, in group chats, all that type of stuff. Money. Things have to be financed. If there's a candidate that you believe in, if there's a cause that you believe in, if there's a legislative agenda that you believe in, there are groups that are around that push that forward. The third thing is volunteering your time. As Roxy said, there are multiple ways to do that. But even if you can't leave your home, you can host fundraisers. You can host sort of Zoom, let me just tell you about this thing that we talked about. You can host anybody would do a book club or something, etc. Those are ways that you can begin to build political power in your own neighborhood, in your own family. And that is how we actually begin to change the outcomes. Again, like finding out who's in charge, and if they're not doing what I want them to do, get them out and put somebody in there that I want to do my stuff.
All right. Well, listen.
As you can tell, I don't work in the corporate. I cuss a lot.
You are, brother. Listen, we're a little bit over. Let me just say this: I appreciate all of you staying a little bit longer, and to our audience that stayed a little bit longer. If the 3 panelists here, as examples, can sort of give us a playbook and a roadmap for what we should be doing, I think we'll be in really good shape. So thank you very much for your wisdom, for your participation. We appreciate it. And we're going to close the call. Thanks, everybody.